Hello everyone. The topic today we will cover is law and morality. Law and morality, relationship, enforcement of morality by law, which is coming under Unit 3 of our syllabus, and the subject is jurisprudence, 4th semester. So, influence of morals on law. Law and morals act and react upon and mold each other in the name of justice, equity, good faith, and conscience. Morals have infiltrated into the fabrics of law. In judicial lawmaking, in the interpretation of legal precepts, in exercising judicial discretion, as in awarding punishment, moral considerations play a very important, a very vital role. Morals work as a restraint upon the power of the legislature because the legislature cannot venture to make a law which is completely against the morals of the society. Secondly, all human conduct and social relations cannot be regulated and governed by law alone. A considerable number of them are regulated by morals. A number of action and relations in the life of the community go on very smoothly without any intervention by law. Their observance is secured by morals. So far as the legal rules are concerned, it is not the legal sanction alone that ensure their obedience, but morals also help in it. Thus, morals perfect the law. So it is often said in marriage, so long as love persists, there is little need of law to rule the relations of the husband and wife. But the solicitor comes in through the door as love flies out of the window, it is said. So this will be a very brief lecture regarding law and morality, as we will discuss not only about the influence of morals on law, but we will at the same time try to understand the relationship between law and morality. Now, it cannot be denied that morality or the ideals related to morals or morality, it got penetrated in the legal domain throughout the globe, throughout the world, depending upon the concept of morality, which varies from region to region. It varies from country to country, okay? The concept of morality. So the first thing we have to understand regarding morality is that morality is not absolute in nature. The morality for me may not be morality according to you. For many, vegetarianism is considered to be moral. For many, it has nothing to do with morality. For them, it's all about food habit. Now, when it comes to law, it can be defined as a structure to establish order in the society, to which all the people in that particular region will conform. So morality, we can say, the first thing, it is not absolute, but it is always relative in nature, because it may vary from person to person, it may vary from society to society, it may vary from country to country. Now, conscience, I think, is that particular psychological aspect that we all have as human beings, and it has penetrated in the legal realm. In the legal realm, it has got penetrated. Now, nowadays we use words like justice, we use words like equity, good faith nowadays, which have their deep roots, we can say, in moral philosophies. Like, let's say, the freedom of conscience. We have the freedom of conscience, which is one of the fundamental rights, which is coming under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. So, freedom of conscience has been interpreted in numerous judgments of the judiciary, especially when it comes to rights of the atheist. But conscience has been explained in various Indian legal philosophies also, like the for example, the concept of dharma. Now, how to explain conscience here? So it is a substantial aspect of this topic, and we can easily understand the relationship of law with that of morality by discussing little bit about conscience. Okay, like when you do something wrong, let's say, or when we do something wrong, it strikes our mind deep inside that I have done something wrong. Though I may express the reality or not, but deep inside that feeling which tells you or which tells me that I have committed or you have committed something wrong, it is your conscience. Now, if you see that during various oath-taking ceremonies of the, let's say, of the ministers, governors, and so on, okay, so many people take oath in the name of God, and it is part of the law also. As per one's own faith, a person can take oath in the name of God or any entity in which that person believes. Now, that religious person, he or she feels that the morality is to take oath in the name of God, and the law also codifies this legal rule, so that such persons can take oath as per his or her faith. But think about that person, or think about those persons who does not believe in God. Okay, think about that person who does not believe in God. Then comes the freedom of conscience here. It also means to decide what is right or what is wrong. For that person who is an atheist, or maybe let's say agnostic, to take oath in the name of God, it may not be a right way. It may not be a right approach for that person. So such type of persons can take oath, let's say, in the name of the Indian Constitution, or in the name of we the people, or may directly take oath in the name of conscience. Okay, in the name of conscience. So another important thing we often talk about, like justice, which cannot be explained in words. Justice cannot be explained in words. Though different jurists gave different interpretations when it comes to this particular word justice, there are different theories, different philosophies related to justice. All are more or less based on morality. Like, for example, there are many religious countries. I don't want to name any religion here, it will be controversial, where public weeping of the offenders is considered one of the means by which they think justice can be rendered to the victims. And we also talk about good faith, and the idea of good faith also penetrated in the legal world, in the legal domain, like a contract should be done in good faith, etc. These things we often discuss. We have good faith in one hand, which is morality, and we have contractual laws, which are legal codes or legislations, we can say. So these are some of the examples of how law and morality coexist with each other and maintains a harmonious relationship, we can say. Now, law without morality, it seems cannot move forward. Okay, law without morality, it seems to me, it cannot move forward. So law is dry without morality. Like, suppose I'm citing one example here. A person, let's say, is a poor lady. She has, let's say, 4 children. Her husband died. Suppose she committed a crime, a theft. Now, in the eye of law, she is a criminal. In the eye of morality, she did something wrong. But when this case will go to a judge, the judge will be responsible to see whether that lady committed this act due to poverty or not. If it is so, obviously she is supposed to get some sort of punishment. But from the humanistic perspective of morality, if I can put it in this way, humanistic perspective of morality, there should be flexibility in imposing the punishment upon that poor lady. So the conflict of mind and heart of the judge will be there. But judgment is all about what? Is all about keeping balance between law and morality. At the same time, maintaining harmony of law with that of morality. Now, suppose, let's say the legislature makes a law or pass a legislation which is completely against the accepted morality of the society. It cannot be done. Like, let me cite one example. Like in many countries, pornography and prostitution are legal. In India, as far as the accepted morality of our society it is concerned, still it is not a widely accepted concept. If a law is passed, let's say to legalize all this, the accepted morality of the society will put restraint upon such legislative decision. Though there are people within our society, within the Indian society, who are possessing the view to legalize all this, but as of now, we don't see the possibility of it. And the widely accepted morality of our present society is as if maintaining conflict with these views. Okay, and there are certain things which goes fully smooth and fine without the intervention of law and morality, as if doing and morality as if doing great work without the intervention of law. So there are certain things which goes fully smooth and fine without the intervention of law, and morality as if doing what? Doing great work. Morality as if doing great work without the intervention of law. Now here I am talking about morality which is accepted by the mass of a particular region, Like for example, there may be conflict between, let's say, husband and wife, but it can be mitigated by mutual understanding, expressing love. Families from the both sides may come together to mitigate and end such issues. So by existing moral conduct, such issues can be solved. But let's say the husband assaulted the wife, or the wife assaulted the husband. Here the law related to cruelty and many other laws will make their way to enter. So what is important to be noted here is that where morality, or let's say accepted moral code of conduct, is enough, laws will not intervene in such cases. Now, morality, as it is always relative in nature, I have discussed about this several times. Morality, as it is always relative in nature, the relativeness of morality may manifest as per the accepted morality or moralities in different regions. I am repeating this again. Morality, as it is always relative in nature, the relativeness of morality may manifest as per the accepted morality or moralities in different regions. Like, let me cite one example here. Like in India, we have what? We have Hindu Marriage Act, let's say. Let's say Hindu Marriage Act we are having. Now, in Hindu Marriage Act, marriage between prohibited degrees of relationship and sapindas are prohibited, as we know. The marriage will be considered as incest if it takes place between relations of sapindas. Therefore, this type of marriage among Hindus, it is prohibited. But if the customs allows, so then it would not be considered as invalid. Okay, if the customs allows, so then it would not be considered as invalid. Like marriage between maternal uncle and niece can be valid marriage in India if the custom of the accepted morality of that particular region permits it. Like in some South Indian states, they have the custom of marrying niece, that is maternal uncle can marry niece. Okay, so these are some of the exceptions, we can say. So as we know, society is always dynamic, it is ever changing. Okay, it is always evolving. So there was a time when people belonging to LGBT community were treated to be moral, or the conduct within same genders, sexual conduct, those things were considered to be moral acts. Now in India also, after the 2018 judgment in Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India, the Honorable Supreme Court of India decriminalized all this consensual sex among adults, including homosexual sex. So we can say law responds as per the psychological evolution, as per the social evolution of the age, evolution of the age. And if the law does not change with changing concept of social morality, then what will happen? Then law becomes an obstacle for implementing various humanistic values or human rights. Like for example, Sati Pratha. Sati Pratha, it was considered to be moral by many religious leaders. But the then British Empire did what? The then British Empire in India criminalized such type of heinous acts. On international law also, morality surfaced. It came into full existence, we can say, immediately after the two consequent world wars. Like we are having UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It came into existence on 10th December 1948, which starts with, in Article 1 of it, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So international law, we can say, got infused with the principles of morality in the form of human rights, in the form of international trade laws, in the form of international relations, laws related to international relations. Like in India, the ancient saying or verse from our Vedas, I think it was from Rig Veda, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that all or the entire world is one single family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So it manifested in our Indian constitution, like we have Article 51 in our Indian constitution, which talks about promotion of international peace and security. So the morality here is international peace. The morality here is international peace, and the law is what? The law is Article 51. Okay, so these are some of the examples we can cite. So there has been debates. There has been constructive debates between various jurists, thinkers, to give their thinkers to give their valuable opinions regarding while giving their valuable opinions regarding the relationships between law and morality. There have been debates, and these are constructive debates between various jurists, between various philosophers, thinkers, okay, while giving their valuable opinions. And they talked about relationship between law and morality. They talked about influence of morals on law. All these things they have discussed. So there are thinkers or jurists who saw morality from the perspective of duty. Like for example, in ancient India, we had the concept of dharma. Now dharma, roughly we can relate it to duty, but we can say it is more than duty. It is more than obligations. Dharma is not only the sense of right and wrong or conscience, but applying this philosophy of dharma, ancient Hindu rulers, what they did? But applying this philosophy of dharma, ancient Indian rulers kept the rule of law alive in the society by rendering justice as per the values according to dharma. Now, different ancient scriptures of India, though, explain dharma from different perspectives, from different angles. One of the verses from Rig Veda in Sanskrit always catch my attention, and that is Bahujana Sukhaya, Bahujana Hitaya cha, which means for the happiness of many, for the welfare of many. The concept of India as a welfare state and the whole idea revolving around legislating welfare legislations. The credit can be given to this particular verse, Bahujana Sukhaya, Bahujana Hitaya cha, which expresses the morality of welfareism. And this morality of welfareism is getting manifested as welfare legislations. Now, what example can be cited here when it comes to welfare legislations? Like we have National Rural Employment Guarantee Act 2005, also known as NREGA, which is an example of what? Which is an example of welfare legislation. Okay. Now, let us little bit talk about growing importance of models. Now, sociological approach has got its impact upon the modern age. This approach is more concerned with the ends that law has to pursue. Thus, recognized values, or in other words, morals. Of course, the morals of the modern age have become a very important subject of study for good lawmaking. On international law also, morals are exercising a great influence that we have discussed now. The brutalities and inhuman acts in world wars made the people to turn back to morals, and efforts are being made to establish standards and values which the nations must follow. Perhaps there is no other so forceful ground to justify the Nuremberg trials as morals. If the law is to remain closer to the life of the people and effective, it must not ignore morals. So if the law is to remain closer to the life of the people and effective, it must not ignore morals. This is from the material that I have shared. So now if we see from the traditional perspective, law is always associated with the religious principles, with customs, with the concept of what we call divinity. Like for example, let me cite one example here to make it more clear. Like for example, adultery law under section 497 of the Indian Penal Code, which was struck down, holding it manifestly arbitrary, archaic and violative of the rights to equality and equal opportunity to women. Now, the then Chief Justice of India clearly stated that equality is the need of the hour, and that time has come when the husband should not be considered the master. And he further said, adultery cannot and should not be a crime. It can be ground for a civil offense. It can be ground for a civil offense, a ground for divorce. Okay. So with the changing need of the society, the law changes. And the name of the case, this adultery judgment, the name of the case was Joseph Shine versus Union of India. Joseph Shine versus Union of India, which came in the year 2018, 27 September. So adultery law is having its religious background. It is biblical in nature. And there are other religions which also prohibits such acts, adultery acts, okay? Now, as we know, Devlin, he was a famous jurist, Devlin. So, according to him, that is Devlin, if a reasonable man finds something disgusting or immoral, in the society, the law should not tolerate such immorality. Now you may ask this question, who is a reasonable man? What it is all about, reasonable man. So reasonable man, it means a person who is having proper, let's say, reasoning capacity or rational thinking. So if such persons in the society finds something immoral, it is the indication that law must intervene in such social matters to establish morality again. So if the moral act is private in nature, let's say it is private in nature, this not moral act actually, if the immoral act, let's say if the immoral act is private in nature, then also according to Devlin, it can weaken the fabric of the society if they are sufficiently grave, if they are sufficiently serious in nature. Okay. Now, let us consider the debates which mounted between Hart and Fuller and Hart and Devlin. Okay, so and what these debates add to our understanding to the link between law and morality. So it will be argued and concluded that morality plays an important and essential role in our understanding of our legal responsibilities. It will recognize that there has been a long association between morality and law, and that traditionally law has been associated with religions, customs, and divinity. Devlin supported the view that law should not tolerate that which the reasonable man finds disgusting. Society needs a moral identity because it is the moral values of society that makes it cohere. For Devlin, even private acts of immorality can weaken the fabric of society if they are sufficiently grave. Okay? If they are sufficiently grave. So what we will do here is that let us first of all discuss about Hart's position. Okay, H.L.A. Hart. So who was H.L.A. Hart? H.L.A. Hart, he was a British legal philosopher and a major figure in political and legal philosophy. H.L.A. Hart was a professor of jurisprudence at Oxford University and the principal of if I can pronounce it well correctly, Brasenose College, Oxford. Okay, sorry for my pronunciation. So H.L.A. Hart was a British legal philosopher and he was also a major figure in political and legal philosophy. So let us talk about H.L.A. Hart's position. Okay, H.L.A. Hart's position. Now, Hart, being a positivist, criticized the judgment for disregarding the written law. Hart argued that the law remains law even if it does not meet the demands of external moral criteria. Hart said, law is not morality. Okay, do not let it supplement morality. I am repeating this again. Hart said, law is not morality, do not let it supplement morality. Hart said that the law being inherently evil and how one ought to react to the law are two separate issues, and merely because a law's foundation is on evil, it cannot be said to be law. Hart also stated that if wicked, immoral laws are considered valid, that does not create any problem when a choice between two evils has to be made in extreme circumstances. Hart also said that a legal system might show some conformity with justice or morality, but that does not follow that a rule of recognition, a criteria of legal validity, ought to include morality in it. Law and morality are not interchangeable terms, and law cannot be struck down merely if it is devoid of any moral content. Now, if I can simplify this, the Hart's position, H.L.A. Hart's position, if I can simplify this, Hart argues as a legal positivist. That is, he does not accept any necessary connection between law and morality. Law and morality, these things are totally separate according to him, according to Hart. In other words, the validity of law is not dependent upon its moral acceptability. Even a repugnant, according to Hart, even a repugnant, that is offensive or nasty law, may be legally valid. However, that does not mean we must obey laws that are morally repugnant. Obedience remains a matter of personal decision or conscience, according to Hart, according to H.L.A. Hart. Now, we have talked about that Hart was a legal positivist. Okay, Hart was a legal positivist. Now, legal positivism is a school of jurisprudence whose advocates believe that the only legitimate sources of law are those written rules, regulations, and principles that have been expressly enacted, adopted, or recognized by a governmental entity or political institution, including administrative, executive, legislative, and judicial bodies. Okay, and thus no laws can be regarded as expressions of higher morality, according to the legal positivism theory. or a higher principle to which people can appeal when they disagree with the laws. Thus, no laws can be regarded as expressions of higher morality or higher principles to which people can appeal when they disagree with the laws. It is a view that law is a social construction. The creation of laws is simply an exercise in brute force and an expression of power, not an attempt to realize any loftier moral or social goals. Therefore, from a positivist perspective, this is very important to understand the positivist perspective, okay? Their view or their views. Therefore, from a positivist perspective, it can be said that legal rules, this is very important, legal rules or laws are valid not because they are rooted in moral or natural law, but because they are enacted by legitimate authority and are accepted by the society as such. I am repeating this again. Legal rules or laws are valid not because they are rooted in moral or natural law, but because they are enacted by legitimate authority and are accepted by the society as such. So we can say, if we simplify this, so according to Hart, H.L.A. Hart, as he was a positivist, he regarded laws are treated valid not because of any moral infusion or not because of any moral inclusion in the law, but laws are treated valid only if these are enacted by legitimate authority and are accepted by the society. You see, let me cite one example here. As we can see, during COVID-19 pandemic, the wearing of mask, it was made compulsory and mandatory, and fines were also imposed for not wearing mask. Now we may say the duty here is to wear the mask and the morality here is to be responsible and not to spread the disease among others, being irresponsible. But if we asked Hart, H.L.A. Hart, about this particular rule, about this particular law made by the government, he would perhaps reject the morality aspect of this mask wearing rule to tell you. Okay, H.L.A. Hart would perhaps, he would see it from the perspective of validity. Now the government made the rule. The government made the rule with a purpose, so it is valid according to him. Now this callous attitude such as being irresponsible, not wearing the mask, could spread the disease, and the intentional or unintentional behavior in this regard is after all evil according to Hart's philosophical interpretations. And the decision to make the law or rule by imposition of fine for not wearing the mask, the rule has been made by the government, and as it was made by the government, it is valid according to Hart's philosophy. It will be treated as valid. So there is no need to see it from the perspective of morality. Here, at least from the perspective of Hart's philosophy, we can say that there is no need to see it from the perspective of morality. Okay. Now, Hart also talked about morally repugnant law or morally offensive or nasty laws, okay, may be treated legally valid. Now, how come we can justify this? This is the challenge. Now, let me cite one example here. Prostitution, as we know, is legal in many countries, and in New Zealand, prostitution is legal since 2003. Since 2003, prostitution is legal in New Zealand. There are even licensed brothels operating under public health and employment laws, which means the workers, the sex workers, they get social benefits just like other employees. So here, the morality is up to the people to decide. They have to make decision whether to go in such places or not. So it is a matter of personal decision or conscience, personal conscience, individual conscience. But as far as law is concerned, the prostitution is legal in New Zealand and in some other countries also. Okay. Now, this we need to be clear that H.L.A. Hart acknowledges that law and morals are bound to intersect at some point. For instance, let's say where a case comes up with the wording of the relevant statute, let's say, is not sufficient, where the wording of the relevant statute is not sufficient, let's say, to give effect to the purpose of the law. Okay, Professor Hart refers to these problems as of the penumbra. He calls it penumbra. Okay, now Hart says that such cases can be solved by judicial interpretation. Such cases can be solved by way of judicial interpretation. Okay, I am repeating this again. Okay, this we need to be clear that Hart acknowledges that law and morals are bound to intersect at some point. For instance, where a case comes up where the wording of the relevant statute is not, let's say, is not sufficient to give effect to the purpose of the law. Now Professor Hart refers to these as problems of the penumbra, Penumbra. Now Professor Hart says that such cases can be solved only by judicial interpretation. A decision can be made about what the law ought to be, and moral factors play a crucial role in deciding such hard cases. But he was against the notion that the validity of law depends completely upon morality. He was against it. Okay, this particular notion. Now let us come to Fuller's position. Okay. Now, Lon Fuller, he was a noted legal philosopher who criticized legal positivism and defended a secular and procedural form of natural law theory. Fuller was a professor of law at Harvard University for many years and is noted in American law for his contributions to both jurisprudence and the law of contracts. Okay. Now let us little bit discuss about Fuller's position when it comes to law and morality. Now Fuller stated that law must possess certain characteristics if it is to be classified correctly as law. And one of the most important of such characteristics is inner morality. This is very important, inner morality, according to Fuller. For Fuller, if law contains no morality, it is not law. He also criticized H.L.A. Hart, for ignoring the inherent inability of Nazis to be considered as a legal system. He then criticizes positivism itself, and states that the fundamental positivism that law must be separate from morality. He considers this postulate incorrect as it denies the possibility of any bridge between the obligation to obey law and other moral obligations. Fuller considered law to be a collaborative effort to aid in the satisfying of mankind's common needs, which with each rule of law having a purpose related to the realization of a value of the legal order. Since a purpose and values are closely related, a purpose may be considered as a fact and a standard for judging facts, and thereby removing the dualism between is and ought. Fuller considered that any regime that assists in the spread of injustice has forfeited its right to expect allegiance from its citizens. So if we simplify Fuller's view, this was Fuller's position. If you simplify the language, now as you know, Fuller is a naturalist and he sees laws as a way of achieving social order by regulating human behavior through laws. Fuller believes that our legal systems are derived from the norms of justice, which have a moral aspect. Fuller also argues that for a law to be valid, it must conform to a certain moral function test. Now, as we know, naturalists or followers of natural law, they believe that the validity of man-made laws completely depends upon their compatibility with a higher moral authority. Where laws do not satisfy the requirements of this higher moral authority, then those laws lack validity. So there are two types of natural lawyers. Okay, there are two types of natural lawyers. Those, number one, those that believe in laws from a god, and number two, those that do not believe in God, but that society has an unwritten moral code that laws should follow. Now, natural law is derived from eternal law, we can say, and it deals with general rules of conduct that govern the behavior of beings possessing reason and free will, that is humans. Okay, we all are possessing, with the humans, we all are possessing what? We are possessing reason, and at the same time we are possessing free will also at the same time. So it is implanted in us by God as part of our nature, and so we have a natural inclination to behave in a way that fulfills our purpose in life. These include the inclination to preserve life, to procreate and live within society. Okay, now by reasoning upon natural law, certain general rules of conduct can be developed. The first of these is to do good and avoid evil. Some others are not to commit suicide, reflecting the inclination to preserve life, to rear and care for offspring, reflecting the inclination to procreate and to develop our moral and rational capacities. Okay, so Lon Fuller, as he was professor of jurisprudence at Harvard Law School, he is known as a natural lawyer. Okay, in that he totally rejected legal positivism. He refused to accept the belief that law has no higher authority than that of a sovereign authority. Now, Fuller, he talked about inner morality. This is very important when it comes to his stand or his philosophy. Fuller talked about inner morality. Now, inner morality, you may say that what is inner morality? Now, inner morality is that aspect. Inner morality is that aspect by which we can understand whether that particular law is resonating with our inner moral values or not. We can say inner morality constitutes inner morality of a collective group, or that of the whole society, inner morality of the whole society. But there are critics who are having the opinions, who are having the view that inner morality is always an individual phenomena, as morality is always relative, that is, it varies from person to person. But from the perspective of Fuller, moral fabric do exist in the society. Like, for example, stealing, not to steal. Not to steal is both a moral duty, at the same time it is also a legal duty. Now the inner morality here is not to steal, and legal duty here is also not to steal. So this inner morality, we can say, is something, an inborn, innate, natural quality or qualities in human beings. Okay, inborn quality, inborn attribute that we are having. Now see, to make Fuller's stand more justified, or let's say more clear, let us consider this example for a while. Suppose a particular law has been enacted in a particular country, let's say to oust a particular community from a country based on, let's say, racism. We can relate this incident with what happened historically in Uganda, if you all are aware of this incident. Now, during the regime of dictator Idi Amin in Uganda, there went around 15,000 people of Asian descent. Majority were Indians and Pakistanis. They were expelled from Uganda. Now see, they were living in Uganda since generations, 2-3 generations. Suddenly, based upon racial notion, what the dictator Idi Amin did? They were ordered. Those people were ordered to be expelled. They lost their citizenships. So the inner morality has been violated. The inner morality of the society, of the nation, has been violated in this particular law to expel Indians and Pakistanis from Uganda. The law has been enacted by the dictator Idi Amin, no doubt, but it lacked the inner morality. The inner morality is to protect the rights of citizens. I am repeating this again. The inner morality is what? It is also to protect the rights of citizens. This can be regarded as one of the substantial aspects of inner morality. Okay, one of the substantial aspects of inner morality. Now, upon examining both Hart and Fuller's view on what the law is and how it relates to morality, we find that Fuller's naturalist ideals offer the most solutions to the problems in the modern day legal system. An example of this is where Hart says that we should identify what law is and what it should be. This still leaves the question, why do we obey the law? Is it because of the sanctions behind it, or is it because we accept it, as Hart believed? Okay. Would we refrain from committing rape, let's say, if there was no punishment? Or perhaps law is obeyed because it is the most convenient and just way of organizing our societies? Now, all these questions will have a different answer depending on one's philosophical point of view. I, on the other hand, personally believe that we may also obey law because we believe that it is right or morally correct. This last suggestion leads me to my next point. Are we obligated to obey the laws of a state if we deem the state immoral? Examples of these states are the apartheid laws of South Africa or the Nazi laws of Germany. These were all legitimate laws as they were passed by their relevant parliaments. But did those laws have moral authority? Now, these are some of the questions which I would like to put before ourselves, okay? Now, let us come to Devlin's position. Okay? Now, Patrick Arthur Devlin, also known as Baron Devlin. So he was a British judge, and a legal philosopher. Okay, Devlin. Now let us discuss about Devlin's position regarding law and morality. Now, law without morality, according to Devlin, destroys freedom of conscience, and is the paved road to tyranny. Okay, he talked about society's quote unquote moral fabric, which the society holds together, and if the criminal law does not respect and reinforce society's morality, it will destroy the moral fabric, leading to the disintegration of society. Any category of behavior that is capable of posing a threat to social cohesion can be governed by moral laws. They are justified as they protect society against the disintegrating effects of actions that undermine the morality of a society. There is no limit of reach of law, and thereby immorality could also be governed by law. Immorality is what every right-minded person considered immoral. Devlin suggested that common morality could be determined from asking what is acceptable to the ordinary man, the man in the jury box, who might also be called the reasonable man or the right-minded man. Devlin thus made following recommendations. Number 1, privacy should be respected. Number 2, law should only intervene when society won't tolerate certain behavior. And number 3, law should be a minimum standard not a maximum standard. Law should be a minimum standard, not a maximum standard. Now let us simplify Devlin's position. Okay. Now, every society has its own standard, and interpretation of morality. We know it. There are many things, many problems, many issues which can be solved without any intervention of laws, without making judiciary overburdened. Those problems can be solved by applying our conscience, the existing accepted morality or moral standards in the society. By applying all this, these problems, these issues can be solved. Thus, just for the sake of example, let's say respecting elders. It is part of the social moral conduct, we can say. But at the same time, we also have laws like Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007, which makes it a legal obligation for an heir offspring to provide a monthly allowance to his or her parents, who must be senior citizens, of course, as maintenance, to safeguard the rights and interests of senior citizens in India. But the accepted moral conduct of Indian society is what? To show respect to the elders. So many issues can be solved between the children and the parents by the existing moral conducts. But if such moral conducts, let's say, are not working, let's say from the side of the children, if they assault their parents who are senior citizens, old parents, then only law will intervene in such cases. Here, assaulting old parents, it goes against the moral standards of every right-minded, reasonable person. It cannot be supported by them, by the reasonable persons, by the reasonable people. So it is an immoral act. Here law will intervene because society cannot tolerate such behavior. And Devlin at the same time also recommended that privacy must be respected. Privacy should be respected. Okay? So, as we know, in the landmark judgment, Justice K.S. Puttaswamy, retired, versus Union of India, is a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court of India, which was decided on 24th August 2017, which held the right to privacy is protected as a fundamental constitutional right under Articles 14, 19, 21, the golden triangle of the Indian Constitution. 14, right to equality. 19, freedom of speech and expression. 21, right to life. It was held in the judgment, in this particular judgment, that is Puttaswamy judgment, privacy, it safeguards individual autonomy and recognizes the ability of the individual to control vital aspects of his or her life. So this is a very important judgment. Okay. Now at the same time, Devlin also discussed that law should be a minimum standard, not a maximum standard. Law must be a minimum standard and not a maximum standard. What does he mean by this? Why? The question. Because the maximization of legal standard may surpass the moral fabric of the society. Okay? Law must have morality according to Devlin. If law has the essence of accepted morality of a society, then it can function much better. And the need of such laws will come when morality will face threat. Then only the need of such laws will come. Like what we have seen in Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007. If the parents, who must be senior citizens, old parents, are not getting adequate maintenance and respect from the children, then only this law will be applied. If the family is having no such problems, then there is no question of going for these laws or this law. Okay? Thank you.